Οπότε είμαστε πάρα πολύ χαρούμενοι. We are very pleased, we are very honored that John Mavroudis is with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's a real pleasure to work with you.
First of all, thank you, and Signomi. I wish I could speak better Greek, and although I'm a proud Greek-American, my language skills are not so good except for Ventrepestek, Katikato, Papafaisu. That's about it. It's not real long. So thank you. I'd like to take a quick picture of all of you because I'm very thrilled to be here. So this is going to be fun. Cheers. Thank you. I'm just going to start going through some of this. First, the tools I use regular illustration tools like pencils, pens, paints, but for most of my work, I've turned to digital work, drawing on the iPad with an Apple Pencil. I find I'm able to get the quality of the work I want in a quick fashion. I'm able to make it look organic, which is important to me. I'm not a big fan of quote-unquote computer illustration. I admire people that can do that well, but my point is to try to get across something, a message or a thought, in a way that seems a little bit more organic to me. I'll go through some of it. Most of my beginnings, although I was raised in a political family, my Theos and Theas and Yaya and Papu, we used to go over to their house every weekend in the United States, and I would hear arguments about politics all the time. And so that was kind of embedded in me. But my other passions are music and film. And I started off doing posters for the Film War. They have an amazing series they've been doing since the 1960s where if you go to a concert, they hand you a poster on the way out of the band you saw. So these are some of the posters that I did for various bands. Usually I was a fan of the band when I asked to do the poster, but sometimes they would ask me to do one for a band I wasn't familiar with. This is a funny one because I was a big fan of the band, the opening band, Rogue Wave. They were from the Bay Area, where I live. And I was standing next to the bass player who was looking at the poster. He didn't know I was there. And the quote was, "What is this shit?" So you have to have a very thin skin at first maybe, but you have to thicken it as you go on and don't worry about criticism. Everybody likes certain kinds of art and nobody's 100% in love with all art. So as an artist, you have to thicken your skin a little bit. These are some other of my favorite posters from that time. I can kind of flip through. This was more about, that's the same band, Rogue Wave, that I liked. But this is about the act of creating and destroying and how some people seem to want to create and other people want to tear down any kinds of acts of creation. This was originally an idea for the New Yorker that they did not go for. They didn't want to go with it. But I always loved this idea of just generations and through the music. So I ended up using it. You can repurpose things and use them again in different posters. So I did a screen print for the band They Might Be Giants based on the same concept. It was fun to do it. I wish I could have done it like in full color because I like it a lot more, but when you're going to be screen printing something, money and time and all these kinds of things come into play. I started doing other typographic portraits. This was for the gay rights leader Harvey Milk, who was assassinated in San Francisco. Another one of Hillary Clinton using famous women from throughout American history. This I had submitted to the New Yorker and was a possibility if she had won, but we all know what happened. Much to most of America's chagrin. And then, so before that, we had this. This was something where I was so disgusted by his entering into politics, and he represented everything I found abhorrent. And so I have friends who I disagree with politically, and we have arguments all the time, sometimes online, you can probably go find them, and sometimes in person. But I got tired of explaining over and over again why I found Trump so disgusting. And so a few months before the election, I just sat down and started making a list of every word I could think of that I think fit Donald Trump. And I started creating this portrait. I didn't have any magazine in mind. I didn't have anything in mind other than get out of my system and be able to point to this when my friends started arguing and say, this is everything, just take a look at this, stare at this for a while, and that's my arguments. I feel that every word on here is fact-checked. Like I could literally go through this list of all these words and probably explain in stories why that word was used. We can all, of course, add to that list now that he became president. There's probably a lot more I would like to do. But it said everything I felt I needed to be said with him at the time. And again, sometimes these portraits, in this case, there's a little bit of space between the lettering. It makes for a much more unflattering portrait. People have said it looks like worms, and I'm okay with that. Anyway, so I started sending this out to a few magazines, and The Nation magazine picked it up as their cover issue for the election. This is right before the election. I was really happy it made print because I felt it deserved a wider audience. I mean, it's okay to put it up in my bedroom, but that's not really going to do too much good. So then this leads into the political posters that I've done in the past, or political illustrations. All of these politicians that I'm about to show, there's only 3 of them for now, but all 3 of them are, like I said, part of the Trump cult where they defend Donald Trump. But before he became president, they were hugely critical of him. They were saying he's the worst, we're going to lose if we nominate him, all this stuff. And as soon as he becomes elected, they are like part of the family now. And this is the danger of allowing somebody like a Trump to take effect. I don't need to tell the Greeks this, of course, Americans are finding out the hard way. So these are, again, a series of politicians. So we had Mike Pence, the vice president, and Marco Rubio of Florida, and Lindsey Graham. Marco Rubio said Trump is a con artist, and Trump has spent an entire career sticking it to the working Americans. All those statements are absolutely true, but you wouldn't know it now. So I feel it's important for these people to be called out. What America did in Iraq, and how we let our morals fall into the toilet. I mean, I know it's not the first time, but so the torture report came out, and I was pretty critical of what our government was doing as soon as I found out about it. A lot of people were, but in a time of quote-unquote crisis, a lot of things can fall by the wayside, including civil liberties or any kind of morality. The Time magazine was a big deal to me because it sort of, it was kind of like a breaking thing, and I got a lot more publicity for it after that. I had been watching, like most people in America, and a lot of people around the world were watching the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford, and she spoke to, I think, a lot of messages that a lot of people felt deeply, and she seemed like a courageous figure for coming forward. And so Time magazine had seen my portraits of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and they wanted to do a portrait of Christine Blasey Ford in the same respect. So when I was told it was Monday and they needed the final drawing on Wednesday, usually these portraits take me a couple of weeks, maybe, sometimes a month. I'm getting better at doing them, but this was a 2-day turnaround. So Time magazine called, I said, yeah, sure. And then after I hung up the phone with them, I said, okay, can I do this? So I started going through her testimony and pulling out relevant passages. and placing them in certain places along with her, where I thought they belonged. This was some of the beginning portions of it. Time magazine got back to me and added extra messages or places. Some things changed. You see her hand where it said, I believed he was going to rape me. There were certain phrases that were very stark and very graphic. And Time gave me a call when they were looking at this first image that I'd sent to them, first try, and said, we don't need to re-traumatize her, we just need to make the message known. And I agree with that. So it started changing a little bit. You can see more of a close-up, oops, yeah. And so then I had to think about where it would go on the page and how things would be laid out. And again, in her eyes, there are visual cues, so I placed those next to the eyes. On the mouth, where she talks about a cry for help, I tried to yell for help, I put that on her mouth. I separated the word help and made that her teeth so the word help could be white and stand out a little bit more. And that's sort of the final, you can see a little bit more details of this. All her memory quotes, things that she remembered, were stuck around. I thought it should go around the forehead area or the brain. And then the rest I kind of played off of and tried to fit in wherever I could. And that was the final cover. The feedback I got, that was tremendous. Usually if I get 40 retweets or something, I'm pretty happy. I'm like, oh, that's good. And then the next day I woke up after that had been published online, and there was like 4,000 notifications on Twitter. And I was like, Time got back to me about 6 months later and wanted to do something based on the shootings. There had been a mass shooting maybe about 15, 20 minutes from my hometown of San Jose in Gilroy, and we used to go to the Garlic Festival, so they said we want to this is just a sketch idea, they wanted to list all the names of the cities where there had been a mass shooting in America, and that meant their standards were either 4 or more people either injured or killed in a single incident, not counting the gunman. That list ended up being 153 cities. That list is from January until August. That's 1 year, half a year, really. So I started sending comps of, their only brief was to put the word enough in there somewhere. And so I sent them this sketch originally, but they said we didn't really want that. How if we just list city names, just keep it tight. I said, okay. So I looked at their previous cover that had the word enough with the Parkland survivors. It was, I think, 4 of the kids from Parkland shooting, and they had the word enough. So I mimicked the word enough and used it as sort of a background and filled in the words around it. So these are all cities, and this is just some process of going through trying to fit in everything. The larger cities I made more prominent because they were more recent. There was 3 shootings in a period of 2 weeks, and they were devastating. When I filled it all out, I tried something where I said, well, maybe if I fatten out the letters and just put a hand there for enough. And so I played with that idea as an idea. And Time said, no, we like it, but we really want to keep this very stark. So that ended up being the final cover, where you see all the things listed. There was a reason for pause when I'm writing out all these cities when I get to my hometown of San Jose, because it happened there. It happened in 4 other cities around where I live: Berkeley, Vallejo, Richmond. Some cities appear many times, like Chicago. But the thing about this is we're trying to capture the problem, because what happens in America is there's a shooting, people are outraged, people try to speak up, and then they say it's not the time to speak up because this is the time to pay respects. And then so opposition is hushed, and then you move on and something else happens in the news and you forget. And then it happens again and again. It's this endless cycle. So what Time thought it was important was to show on a cover the totality, and this is only like almost 6 months. And it cuts across. You hear about red states, blue states. They talk about places where Trump is popular, places where the Democrats are popular. It doesn't matter, small towns, big cities, it happens. So that got a lot of play too. And I was very honored to be able to do this. Which leads to the rejected pile. Every illustrator or artist knows, I'm sure everybody knows about rejection, but in the case of an illustrator or artist, there are ways to look at things. So these are all illustrations and ideas that I had that, I could try to do something. I was trying to think of Donald Trump's brain. That's a very dangerous place to go. It's also, I had to expand it obviously for this image because it's not that big. So he's all about himself. At the end of the day, everything comes back to him. So I just really like this one. I also took the basic illustration and tried to use it later on and repurpose it in other ways. One of which was that Hillary Clinton lives rent-free in Donald Trump's head. She doesn't pay rent, she just sits there because he talks about her all the time, even though she's not the president. It's 3 years past the election, but there's a few people that occupy a place in Donald Trump's head, and Hillary Clinton was one of them. Barack Obama is another, and he just can't get over it. He can't get over any slight. So this was another one that Time magazine didn't use, but I really liked, which was the Suicide King. In his case, via Twitter, he can't help himself. Then we come to this festival. I'd previously done some posters for the San Francisco Greek Film Festival, which I was very proud to do. And so you can see a couple of examples of that. One was, just basically taking the Parthenon and adding a ship to a San Francisco skyline. I just, any way to make that America better, maybe just add a little bit of Greek to the poster and it will be a little bit better. So the good people here at the festival got in touch with me and said, we'd love for you to do the poster. I was thrilled with the idea. I started researching about Thessaloniki and the festival itself, and I started sending sketches to them. I had a few different ideas. Of course, the tower had to be in there because I'm not thinking about the festival, but I'm thinking about, Thessaloniki and the history and everything. So try to do a few different things. These didn't go anywhere. They said, we're trying to look a little bit more forward. And I said, okay, that makes sense. And so I reread the brief and started, I had done these are some other sketches, some other ideas in terms of using film and something. But and then I started playing with the typographic portraiture again and started just playing around with ideas. A lot of ideas, you just started playing around with them, see where type works, see how it could come together. Started using building a face around it, and then thinking in what context to put it in, whether you have something look like an act of creation or not. I settled on a particular style of face and everything that seemed to work for me, and then went from there. They liked the idea, so I started expanding on it. They gave me a list of words that are associated with the poster, and started filling things in. I tried to practice my Greek writing in the wings, which was not so great, but I hope it's acceptable. And then we come up to a place where I wanted to have a couple of different figures. And it's important, the utility of a film poster as well. This ended up being sort of the completed poster, along with, you can see the two different variations. And then after I had submitted this, and they were very happy with it, after I'd sent it all off, I still play with things. So I started to think about, like, what could you do with, with type and color, and you can start breaking it down so you have kind of a little more prominent features of it and it starts working in other ways. So I made a couple of different versions of that and sent it along to them. And so we ended up having some more variety. When you're doing a poster, and as an artist, I was talking to Dimitri about this earlier, it's easy to be precious about your work and to say, you know, oh no, it's my work, don't touch it, and please stand 5 feet away from it, and please don't, you know. But you have to look at the people you're doing work for and think about the utility of what it is that they're trying to do. They're trying to provide, you know, show your work in a variety of ways. So we were able to, you know, I was able to give them parts of it, and they were able to utilize the frame, they were able to utilize the figures. If you have a chance to see the video that they put together against the buildings,
the video mapping.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And another artist can take your work and do something different with it, and it's remarkable. It's incredible. And so breaking something down, using pieces of it, I've been walking around the city for the last few days and seeing various versions. You walk in and you see the TIFF festival on different doors, and it's wonderful. I think it's fantastic, and I think artists who are so precious about their work that they can't see it touched in any way, shape, or form when you're doing it for somebody. It's not only, if you want to hang your own piece of work and you want to hang it in a museum, that's fine. I understand the aesthetic. I understand wanting to not touch anything. But if people are there to promote their festival, and if they're doing it in an honorable way, and they're doing it working with the artist, not against the artist, they're not, I think it's fantastic. I think what they've done with the piece of art that I provided for them is, I couldn't be happier. So I wanted to compliment everybody at the festival for doing all this work with it.
John has prepared something like line drawing, so that you can see the process of it.
So when I draw, I usually think differently than a lot of people. When most people sit down with a white piece of paper or white canvas, I start with the black, and instead of drawing shadows or lines, I mean, I'll draw lines, but instead of drawing shadows, I draw light. So I'll start with a black canvas, and you'll see, like if I was just going to start, let me make sure that this is all plugged in, and ready to go. There we go. So, I'll start playing with faces, and what I do is I start drawing. I draw a lot of faces, you can probably tell. I'm enamored with looking at faces and seeing how they play out. But I draw the light part of faces, so I'll start with a figure or something that will hopefully, turn into something more, and I keep, playing with them until I come up with something that I'm happy with. But you can kind of get the idea of the way that I work in terms of, if I was drawing a face or anything. I might do a little bit more sketching if I'm drawing something else, but for faces, I end up doing the same thing over and over again, and it becomes kind of a hypnotizing effect for me because I'm usually thinking about something else and I can fill in and create a face, and then if I want to use it later, great, and if I don't want to, at least I'm thinking about possible ideas that I could be using. And it's funny because my daughter is always talking about how my face looks sad. And her name is Athena, again, so I should probably listen to my muse. But it's sort of the way I draw, and I can correct or change. But you can see that I'm more comfortable drawing with light than I am with in a more traditional form. So I use scratch board, even if I'm doing a lot of paintings. A lot of times I'll paint a canvas. I'll paint a canvas black and then start painting. But it becomes sort of something I've done over and over and over again, and then I get used to it. And like if I'm talking on the phone or something, I'm drawing all the time. People yelling, where are you going? I'm carrying a backpack, so I can draw everywhere and anywhere. And so you get the general idea there. Let me go to something else here. So this is the iPad. You can see tons of faces. I draw a lot. In this case, I started on a piece, not for anybody in particular, but I just felt like drawing a portrait of Bob Dylan. So I started looking at various like videos. I usually try not to use photos when I'm looking for reference material, because photos are a little bit more precious. Usually somebody snapped a photo, you have to go through rights and all that, and I'm just looking for basic imagery, not to copy somebody's famous piece of work or photo. And so I'll usually go through YouTube videos or find like an interview with somebody and maybe stop at a particular frame. In this case, I was looking for something for Bob Dylan, and again, this is a piece that I just felt like doing. I'm not a huge Dylan fan, in other words, in listening to his music. I really appreciate him, and I recognize greatness when I see it, and he's great. And his body of work is incredible. So I started making a list of all the songs, and what would be considered his greatest songs, and figure I should do a portrait of his work. And then you can see that was the beginning, and then this is a more finished version of that. It's still not complete, but what I end up doing is I have my own certain brushes I use, and in this case, you can see the various. In this case, if I'm doing a background, you can just start playing with type. And I have a certain type style that is just sort of natural. I don't play with it too much or try to get too fancy. And then you sort of put things together and see how you can fill things in as you go along the process. So if I was going to do something like this, eventually I would write in a bunch of them. I'm trying to think of another song that he did. The time spent, let's see. I shall be released. So I'll go in here and I'll, next to it, place type where I think it should go. And I'm trying to fill the details in. So it's going to look really rough at first. But what you're hoping to do eventually is to smooth out all the rough angles. And so you would start to fill in all these kind of things. So if I was going to do this and start filling things in now, then I'll just go ahead and literally start coloring in, and it becomes this hypnotic process where I'm, Letter form is interesting because it's so, you just take letters and you think about the precision of letters or typing, and when you're reading a publication and things are so even and nice. But you can actually play with letters, and you saw that in the 1960s with the psychedelic posters, which I'm influenced by as well. And it was done long before that, in the 1920s and 30s. The STEM, I'm a huge fan of their work. If you have a chance to look at their movie posters from the 1920s and the early 30s, it's fantastic. But again, playing with letter forms are very flexible things. So you can go in and change lettering so that it fits in to, you have a lot of play. You have a lot of areas where you can make mistakes or you can fill things in and still have it recognizable, which is important. You want to be able to read stuff. It's funny because in the 60s, a lot of the psychedelic poster artists tried to make deals with the other poster artists to see who could make their type so unrecognizable that it would be almost impossible to read what was being said. That's a fun game to play, but if you want the messages of your words to be seen, if that's important, then you probably shouldn't make it too difficult. But again, playing with the form and adjusting letters, and so you start filling up spaces, and you can keep going and going, and there's a lot of playroom. And then the more you eliminate the back area, the background, the more cohesive your piece will be at the end. So I can keep going here, and you can basically see it becomes kind of a hypnotic thing. So once I have the general type laid down on the piece, like for the scene blade before it, that's when I breathe a sigh of relief, because my first thought is, how do I get everything together? How do I get everything in? How is everything going to work out? Is it going to look good? So there's two anxious moments. The first moment is when you're preparing it and you're hoping everything will come together nicely. The second moment is once you have all the type in, if you're trying to draw a flattering piece of somebody, there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made to make the person look in a flattering light. I certainly wasn't interested in doing that with Donald Trump. I could do that, I won't do that, but you want to take the piece and you want to make it be something that's recognizable and also something, I believe, aspirational. I always worry about making posters of politicians or people, even people I respect, in sort of a godlike way, giving them some kind of like a propagandistic approach, because a lot of times you're setting yourself up for disappointment. It's a good idea to show somebody who's lived a life, and on balance you can look at their life and say, I'd be proud to show this poster as a representation of them. But for politicians, I think that poster, the Hope poster of Obama that everybody has seen, is fantastic. It's just a beautiful portrait. It has the word hope. It hit perfectly the aspirations of Americans who voted for him. All of that can go wrong at some point in their history when they make a wrong decision or do something really terrible. I believe in the aspirational aspects of American politics. I think we should have hope. I'm personally a fan of Elizabeth Warren, and I hope she becomes the next president. But if she's not the nominee in American politics and it's somebody else, I will certainly support that person over Trump. And I want to do a piece for her, but at the same time, I don't, we've seen the history of political posters and how they can be twisted, or, when you look at people who are supporting Donald Trump, most of them were critical of him at the beginning and said, they basically were looking at him with eyes wide open, and so they said all these bad things about him, and then they became followers, and we see where that leads. So I'm always wary of falling into some box where I start supporting my candidate when my candidate or leader starts doing things that previously I would have been opposed to, but because it's politics, you want to support your candidate. But I never want to be in the place where I can't be critical of them and look at them realistically. But you get a good idea here of basically the process and how these things go. And so I just, rather than bore you by completing this, you get the general idea how it starts filling in, and then I'll choose a color to go over it or do anything like that.
So, thank you very much for being here, and really thank you, John, for being here.
Thank you to everybody who came today. I really appreciate it.